Good evening, everyone. It's Tony here from Locks to Reads on day 11 of Remembrance Reads. The 11th day is, of course, the Armistice Day in the UK. The Armistice was signed at 11 a.m. on the 11th of November 1918, which is, if my maths is correct, 107 years ago. Before I start talking about what I've read today, I think I want to just when the war ended, basically the British casualties. I'm just going to mention British casualties at this point. There are horrible casualties everywhere, but there were 744,000 dead soldiers and 2,272,000 wounded, which is significantly higher than World War II. There are about 17,000 civilian casualties as well, because Britain was bombed by the Germans in World War One, but not to the degree that it would be in World War Two. But that often gets forgotten because it's Zeppelins, and it seems like something out of science fiction in a way that World War Two bombing perhaps isn't, or perhaps that we don't. There isn't as much film, like bombing and the discussions about the morality of bombing into the Second World War have become such a key part, and we have TV series and films about bombers and bombing that have made that sort of more of a in your brain cultural background than Zeppelins over London in World War One, which also look quite alien. I'm sure there's a reason why a lot of alternative world science fiction has like like Zeppelins or equivalents in. That might be one of the reasons. But before I got on to I wanted to sort of talk about that on Armistice Day. There's 4 people whose name, well, 4 and the 5th one connected to one of them, because although the Armistice, the fighting stopped on the Western Front at 11 o'clock, there was still fighting going on until 11 o'clock. So, and people were still dying. So at 9:30 a.m., George Ellison was the last British soldier to die. At 10:45, Auguste Trebuchon became the last French soldier to die. At 10:58, George Price became the last, as Empire as was, Commonwealth as is, soldier to die. And at 10:59, Henry Gunter became the last American to die. Gunter's story is weird. There's an implication that he kind of went mad for reasons, and that the Germans didn't want to shoot him, but it got to the point where they had to either shoot him or risk being shot themselves. It's a very odd story, possibly a very American story, about which I'd like to know more. But and then the other person is George Parr. George Parr is probably the first British soldier to die in World War One in 1914, and I was about to say coincidence. The coincidence of them being face to face is a coincidence. So George Parr and George Ellison are buried opposite each other in the same cemetery. The fact that they're in the same cemetery isn't possibly a coincidence, because it's just an indication of how little the Western Front moved between 1914 and 1918. They are literally face to face, and as I said, it wasn't deliberately done. It wasn't something they all thought about. It just happened by fluke, for want of a better word. So I just wanted to talk about that before I got on to the actual reading I did today. I did read 3 short stories from the Penguin Book of First World War Stories. I read The Tale by Joseph Conrad, Chanson Triste by A.W. Wells, and His Last Bow by Arthur Conan Doyle, which is a Sherlock Holmes story. And it's probably the one you're most likely to be familiar with, because Sherlock Holmes has a readership beyond the short stories of Joseph Conrad and A.W. Wells. A.W. Wells I couldn't find much information about. I will do a deeper dig because I did find the story he wrote quite interesting. The Tale is probably the best written story of the collection so far. and is also one of the best stories in this collection so far. It's such an odd tale in the way it's almost like a ghost story without being a ghost story. Um, and the way the story starts off as a sort of, I'm making up a story about something that happened that happens on another world, to becoming a story about something that actually happened, is so well done. That I recommend that story. Chanson Triste is also very good. It has a similarish sort of guilt theme to it. It's hard to explain that story without giving it away, but it's about two men on opposing sides who, without meeting, discover they have something in common, a lot in common, and then it ends badly. And then his last bow is I think it's the last Sherlock Holmes story that Conan Doyle wrote, and it's set just before World War One starts, and features a devious German spy, and Sherlock Holmes in one of his. It's very good. Basically, it's a very good Sherlock Holmes story. I like it. It's very much of its time in terms of the way the Germans are behind every devious thing that's been happening in England. How they underestimate the English as actually, I'm going to say English for this one because I think the implication is the English, but that they're sleepy and lazy and they don't see the threat in front of them. But it's very good. It's a very good story. I really liked it. That's why I read all three stories today because I came to the end of the tale and read the first sort of paragraph of Chanson Triste and was like, oh, that sounds quite interesting. I'll read that. And then I read that and I was like, oh, well, I know his last bow. I've read it loads of times, so I'll read it again because I know I like it. And then I thought, actually, I better stop because otherwise I'm going to end up reading about half this book. I must have read the last bow 10 times, maybe more, maybe less, but several times. And then I read chapter 7 of The Great War and Modern Memory, which is called Arcadian Recourses, and just talks about how the British pastoral tradition, poetic literary tradition, influenced the way that World War One is written about, particularly looking at how that tradition has been a long one. Fussell talks about it as if there isn't a similar tradition in other languages, and I don't know if that's true. I'm going to err on the side of assuming Fussell knows what he's talking about, but there's part of me that thinks that can't be true. He mentions John Clare, who I have been reading slowly through the Oxford World Classics major works, and I think if you're going to read something that's not World War One out of this, read some John Clare poetry because it's some of the best poetry written about the countryside that I've ever read in English. And then he talks about, the sort of subheadings are the British model world, the uses of pastoral, sheep and birdsong, roses and poppies, and then he focuses on Edmund Blunden's Undertones of War, in the final section, which he calls a harmless young shepherd, because that's the last line of Undertones of War. He describes himself as a harmless young shepherd in a soldier's coat, which Fussell says is that characterisation is English to a I can't read my own writing, to a fault. That characterisation is English to a fault and beautiful. And it's made me realise that because I've been umming and ahhing about what to read next on a sort of fiction memoir level, and it's made me decide that I'm going to read Undertones of War again. Fussell puts a great case for how good a book it is, and I remember being really impressed by it when I read it the last time, which is probably a long time ago now. It's probably 2012, 2013, 2014. It was back when I started sort of edging towards getting back into reading about World War One, and I went through a rash of reading the main books that you'd expect: Undertones of War, Goodbye to All That, Henri Babus, Ernst Junger, All Quiet on the Western Front, and I sort of pushed through those quite quickly in a phase. So I think it's time to reread it with a bit with the extra knowledge I've picked up since then. It seemed like Blunden was a nice man, a good man, if you in those circumstances, and as innocent as you could possibly be. But I think that was the most interesting chapter for me because the stuff about Roses was really fascinating in terms of sort of showing you the literary background that even before people decided to choose poppies as the symbol of remembrance, that poppies were used in literature to reference often originally for sleep because it was a sort of the opium-y aspect of it. I think was the reason for that, and then it became other things, and then it became a mark of remembrance. He does attack. Is attack the right word? He does take a scalpel to John McCrae's In Flanders Fields poem, because as he points out, he divides it into the two sections, and he said the first section is one thing, the second section is another, and he kind of takes that second section apart a bit, which I understand because having reread it, I only remembered the first verse, and it becomes something more jingoistic and more propagandist in the second verse, but the first verse is beautiful and very moving. So there you go. That's what I read today. I've tried to keep it as short as possible because it seems that people don't watch more than 2 minutes of a video anyway. However interesting you try to be. Oh, that sounded so bitter. That's not meant to be bitter. I know that's because I do the same thing. It's like if you can't get if it's not, you watch it for a bit and then you think, oh, maybe I'll watch something else. So I'm not bitter and twisted about it. I'm aware that it's easily done in a world where there is so much call on our attention. In fact, that today was one where I really thought I wasn't feeling very well today, physically as opposed to mentally. I mean, mentally I'm still all over the shop, but physically I wasn't feeling very well, and that always makes me feel a bit like think about just things in a more deep and depressing way. But I thought about how bad my concentration levels have become in the last couple of years. I think since COVID, I did get COVID once, but I never really suffer from it badly. But I think the lockdown and all those kind of things just sort of turned me into a doom scrolling person with zero concentration, and I'm trying to work out ways to rebuild my concentration. I used to be able to read for hours without losing my concentration. Now I struggle to get through 50. I have to really force myself to concentrate, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It might be old age. I am almost 55, but yeah. But it was a good day's reading. I liked everything I read today, really a lot. The Conrad thing. The only other Conrad thing I've ever read is The Heart of Darkness, and I have been told how great a writer Conrad is, but I have never read anything else. So I would like to possibly do that. I don't know whether I'll do it next year. Next year's reading plan. I've been organising next year's reading plan, and I've sketched out the entire year. It won't happen. It never does. But I have an Excel spreadsheet for every month of the year, which tells me what I'm going to read every month of the year. At least mostly fiction-wise. I haven't done a non-fiction one. And November, I've sort of sketched out what I'm planning to read for next November's Remembrance reads, because there was a couple of sub areas that have come up this year origins, like how it started, how it happened, and why they couldn't stop it, being one. And I've got a load of books. I've got 4 or 5 books on 1914. But yes, so I don't know. I'm waffling again, but anyway, that's what I read. Tomorrow, there might not be a video on Thursday because I am out in the afternoon and evening, so I probably won't get any much done. I might do a short video around. I might try and do let's not worry about it for now. But it's unlikely to be a video on Thursday, which is annoying because I'd like to do one for every day. I might try and do something short and do it on Wednesday. Anyway, that's it. I hope you have a good day, evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are in the world, and catch up soon. Bye bye.